All right, so today we have James from Prism. Welcome to the show, James. How are you doing?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Good, good. Yeah, so I know we want to just jump right into it. I want to ask you, what is like the number one tip you would give or financial advice you'd give to small business owners right now?
Right now, it's probably know your numbers. I mean, that's the biggest thing I see right now. It's like, a lot of people when they go into the online space, they're very good at making money. They lack in the keeping it part. They don't know what their operating costs are, what kind of, general expenses they have. I mean, they just basically look at their bank account and they see a number and they're like, okay, I can spend this or I can't spend this. It's where that money's going in their essentially their accounting system. This way they can kind of get an idea of like, all right, I'm spending X amount of dollars on advertising or marketing or whatever. And then from there, it's like, okay, now they can dive into that and see where they're going across a couple months. So all right, I'm spending too much here. I can spend a little bit more here. What's going to be my return on my investment in this category? So they can kind of go through that process and that'll kind of get them more dialed in for their growth.
Yeah. And I know we talked a little bit about right before the call, but is there any like example you have, some client that you've worked with that you've been able to kind of revamp their whole system to really dial in on some of those numbers?
Yeah, so right now we work with a marketing company, and for them, majority of their expenses is going to like contract labor and stuff like that. So it was really seeing where they're spending the majority of their money. So is it makes sense to, go a little bit more in-house on editing costs or, go overseas because they were using a lot of Upwork. So when you start looking at those numbers, it might be like $50,000, $60,000 a month. So what's the trade-off? Do they keep going that, or can they scale back and increase their profit on that project essentially? So it's, going from there for in-house, we're able to cut those costs from 70 down to 30. So we save $40,000 right there, which goes right to the bottom line. So it's generally increasing their profit. So it's looking at stuff like that where we can say, okay, here's where you're at. Where do we want to go? All right, let's look at what categories can we work with to get us to that number. So that's kind of our approach with everything. It's just, we look at top down, full picture, where they're at, where they want to go. And then we kind of just come up with that game plan. Like we meet with them generally, one client I meet with 2 or 3 times a week, just reviewing stuff. And it also helps the client get a better idea of their business because, they're in the day to day, they're seeing where their money's going. So that's the biggest problem. It's like, you meet with someone on a monthly basis, it's like, everything's reactive. So it's trying to get them a little bit more proactive of where their money's going.
Okay, like as a fractional CFO, that's one of your main services that you provide, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to Prism, like could you give us a bit more about what Prism does and who they service and who they're really doing business with?
Yeah. So essentially, our premise is to kind of be like a one-stop shop. So we can handle whether it's bookkeeping, CFO, we do payroll, we also do credit repair, business funding, business credit. So our approach is that, a client comes into our ecosystem and we can help them in all areas as opposed to like going outside of the network and be like, hey, all right, you go talk to this person, they can help that. What's different for us is, they come in, we do a full audit on what they have. They might not need credit repair. So we don't, that's not something we offer them then. We get their books dialed in. If they want to grow, maybe they need a business credit card or they need business funding. Okay, what do we look at here to get them that access to that capital? Maybe they end up needing personal credit repair. So then we take them through that process, get them dialed in on that. Then we go to the next one, business credit. We get them funded on that. And then that is all encompassed in what we're trying to do because it all boils down to the numbers of what your business does. They're going to look at all that stuff. Do you have profit? What's your revenue? And for that, that's how we're going to be able to give them the best solution for that company. Right now, our biggest clients are mostly marketing companies just because I feel they need a lot more help on the business side. They're very good at marketing. They're very good at making the money, but how they present it, how they view it, that's where everything kind of falls through the cracks, essentially.
Yeah, and it's cool that you guys are doing a lot of different services, right? Not just like one thing. We're just not coming in doing taxes. We're not just coming in and just looking at the numbers like a consultant and then walking away as soon as they know their numbers, right? You guys know exactly how to move it around and then even work with the IRS pretty much in a way to make sure that they get the most bang for their buck. So just walk us through like when did you start Prism? How did it come about, and what really made you want to make a shift into entrepreneur?
Well, so me and my business partner, we got started in the insurance industry, probably 2 years ago. I'd say probably about now. And then for that, I've always been in accounting since I kind of graduated college. So I've always had that background. And he's always been on the scaling side and more on financial services. So we kind of put our heads together and came up with the concept of Prism, where we'll be able to offer all these services under one kind of entity. So that's where, that's how we got started with Prism. We opened up shop in January of this year. So, and, we've already scaled it pretty good in the short time frame. And it's, we're still growing, still scaling. Now we're kind of adding in the additional divisions and building out the divisions for each separate service instead of us just doing it ourselves.
Yeah, and I know just on our own conversations, right? You guys have been able to scale pretty well, and it's just great that you guys have two of you guys working on this, so you guys can like delegate a lot of the things among the two of you. But say someone's starting their own accounting firm tomorrow, or just started in the last few months. Like, what are some of the advice that you would give them, like right now? Like, what were some of the things that would help them keep growing their business?
First is systems. You have to have a system for everything. And the second is actually setting boundaries with clients. Because a lot of times, if we try to be as responsive as possible, because that's one of the pain points that a lot of clients have with us when they come to us is that, hey, I only hear from my accountant at tax time. That, we want to take, like I said before, we want to take that proactive approach where, we're going to meet with you regularly. So when it comes to December, everything's all finished. When it comes to filing the return, everything's all done. Any type of advisory services we can offer will be all done throughout the year. So, we can cut that tax bill down if you have a tax bill. But what happens is if you don't set a boundary where you're overly communicative, they'll text you at 10 o'clock at night. They'll text you on the weekends. It's basically you're 24/7 glued to your phone. And that's not going to be able to help you scale because you're always going to be trying to bounce around. Let me just respond to this message real quick. Let me get this task done real quick, but it's going to take you away from something else. So now you're kind of working inefficient in that process. So that's the biggest hurdle that we faced was just that alone. Because, when you work with one client, you're bouncing in, you're kind of set up, you're working on that stuff. And in your mind, a message comes through. It's like, oh, you know what? That's going to take me 5 minutes. Let me just do that real quick. That 5-minute task, you just took 10 minutes to go hop into it, another 5-10 minutes to get it done, and then 5-10 minutes to get back into what you're working on. So now that 5-minute test becomes like an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually one of the biggest things. Just talking to other accounting firms have been just finding the right clients, right? Just getting their ideal clients so that you don't have to worry about being in like the grunt work of dealing with low quality people who are just bugging you 24/7. Which when you're starting out, that's really who you start off with, right? And it's a great thing you also mentioned when it comes to saying that, hey, you don't just rely, like you guys are really looking to do the advisory things, because one of the pain points from a lot of other companies when it comes to their financial side is what I've seen is that they they have an accountant, right, that they pay just for their tax season. But because the accountant charges by the hour, they're really scared to just ask something because like, oh, that's going to cost me, right? But if you create a package where you're really helping them throughout the year, they feel more comfortable to reach out to you, which I guess depending on who they are, they might really need it, but that really helps them to see the value in what you're doing versus who they were currently working with.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just to also piggyback, it's not really that they're a low value client because, it kind of falls down to the individual. If you make yourself that available, who's not going to take advantage of that? So It was more on me making sure
Okay.
I'm not like as available as I was, because like the clients that we do work with are generally they're great clients. They appreciate everything we do. So it's more of a personal thing where it's setting that boundary. Yeah, because that's my biggest struggle. Because I'm like, oh, I'll just do this real quick. Um,
Got it. Yeah.
but yeah, no, working on a package, like how we kind of structure it is, we figure out what the work's going to entail and come up with a package for it. Just because, hourly, that's the biggest issue. Like, oh, if you charge $150 an hour, a phone call or a meeting, no one wants to have that, pay $150 for that, especially if they
Mhm.
need it. So it's, we meet with them we figure out how many meetings they're going to need and factor that in. And then this way, if a client pays for the tax advisory services, then we don't even charge them for a tax return essentially, because they're paying for that throughout the year. And we find that, that approach kind of works good for us just because, the client doesn't have that fear. We're alleviating that for them. They know if they shoot an email or a Slack message, we're going to get to it within an hour or 2 hours tops now, and get it handled for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good thing mentioned that, hey, it's about you having your own personal boundaries rather than me insinuating that, hey, like you don't like working with your clients.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, so I think you already mentioned, knowing their numbers is one of the biggest things a business can do. But is there anything specific you have noticed across your clients, like a mistake that they're doing that they could be improving on, or really making sure that how they're ready to avoid any audits when it comes to tax season?
Yeah. So for mistakes, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a mistake, but it's going to go back to like knowing your costs essentially, which goes back to knowing your numbers. If you know what your operating costs are, you know what your break even point is, revenue and cost. It's when they start overspending. So if you know, let's say it's going to cost you $10,000 a month to run your business, and you're making $10,000 a month, you're net even, break even on zero. But if you cost $10,000 a month, you're making 10,000, but you're spending another five on just like random stuff, you're going to be constantly operating at a loss. So it's figuring out what does it cost to run your business. Then you match that with the income, and then once you start scaling that, generally your operating costs, for the most part, depending on what kind of tech you use and all that stuff, will relatively stay similar. Unless you really start scaling, you have to up everything. But keeping your fixed costs fixed essentially, and then variable costs very limited, no overspending. And then one of the biggest things is also, pay yourself, like pay the business. Put that money, take a percentage of all income, put it aside. And this way you build a reserve fund. You want to get to where you have enough in the bank to cover a couple months of expenses. This way, if something does happen, you're good. You're not stressing about, oh, I need to sell, like I need to just close deals, because then if you close too many, you might not be able to fulfill. So knowing the bases kind of is a preventative measure for all the additional things that could go wrong.
Mhm.
And you also mentioned when it comes to preparing yourself for financial audit, what to do. First thing is actually knowing what your entity structure is. If you're an LLC or sole member, disregarded entity, you're more subject to an audit as opposed to like an S corp. And then, so that's kind of generally the first thing to look at is what's your entity structure. Second is obviously going to be, documentation. 90% of everything's bought online. So you have email confirmations, just save it and put it in like a Google Drive. I'm not huge on saving paper receipts because I don't want to go through them. So, taking pictures of them, saving them in a folder on your phone, just whatever you have to document, your costs and your expenses and stuff like that. Those are generally like the two biggest things that I would recommend.
Got it. Yeah, and is there like anything you recommend, like if when a business owner is just starting their business for the like today, like what are some of the things they can start off right off the bat so they're not in shambles, say 3-6 months from now when it comes to tracking their numbers?
Yeah. So first things first is obviously what entity are you going to, like, create an entity, whether you're going to be an LLC or generally start with an LLC until you hit about $50,000 net. Then you're going to graduate to an S corp. Get an accounting system in place. Whether it's QuickBooks, Xero, Wave. I know there's some cheaper ones, but just getting something built as a framework that's going to mirror okay, what services are you offering? Okay, now you build an income account. What are your main costs? Like advertising, office expense, all those kind of things. Build out where your categories are in your profit and loss. Just tracking that alone will give someone an edge because they know where all their money's going. They know what they're spending it on. And then the third thing that a lot of people I've started to learn that don't understand is, what method of accounting are you using? Are you using a cash or accrual? Because it's going to change your P&L a little bit. If you're on accrual basis and you're recording invoices, it's going to overstate what you're actually making because you haven't received that income yet. If it's cash, as soon as as soon as the money hits your account, it's recognized as income. So knowing just that alone from a financial statement report, that's a huge thing, because most business owners are like, oh, well, I had $60,000 hit my bank account, but my P&L is showing 80,000 that I made gross revenue. Well, yeah, you're on accrual basis. Well, I don't like that. Well, you have to understand the accounting behind it then. So those are some of the main things that I think people really need to focus on. That, and understanding how financial statements read together. You have to look at your P&L. You have to look at your balance sheet. You have to look at your cash flow, because they all tell essentially the story of the business. Like, you can't just look at one. It's just going to tell you one aspect of it. Oh, my income, my expenses, my profit. But, did you pay down credit cards? Did you, receive a loan? You pay down loan payments or whatever. Those are all cash flow affecting items. So you have to understand how those accounts work to read your cash flow correctly.
Yeah, that's a lot of good information there, right? Because I've heard, having your own entity, having your own P&L sheet, but no one really goes into the accrual versus the cash, the accounting side of things, and how to set those up and how to read those statements and all the different documents, right? So you mentioned a few softwares, right? QuickBooks being one of them. So given that AI is a thing, right, and there's a lot of these tools that are coming out, so how does that affect the accounting industry as a whole, from what you've seen so far?
I think it really depends on the firm itself, because you have a lot of firms they like to do everything old school, and they don't want to implement any of the new stuff. Now, with QuickBooks Online, I'm going to say 90% of all applications now get integrated with it. Whether it's payment processor, whether it's payables, receivables, all that stuff. So you can also, we haven't done it yet, but you can use Zapier for stuff to set up automations. So that's what we're starting to see a lot more of. Now, obviously, you have the AI with ChatGPT, and I think there's Tax GPT. It helps, but it's not something you can rely on. So you still have to do your own due diligence on what's being given. But so that's where I've mainly seen where it is with AI. Now, I know there's new stuff like different workflows. I haven't dove into too much of it yet. There's one that I actually just saw recently where it basically takes the automatically categorization, and it's supposed to be better than the QuickBooks one. So I don't know, but that's something I'm going to be looking at myself.
Got it. And is there anything accounting firms can do to be stand out as technology advances versus someone who's a company, right? Just hiring a accounting intern and just saying okay, use these GPTs and just do my taxes.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't recommend using any of the GPTs to do taxes, just because it's the tax code's constantly kind of changing in a sense with all the new laws coming out and whatever they're talking about in Congress. So you never really know. So you have to kind of stay up on it. To put an intern and just kind of look at ChatGPT, I don't think that's beneficial for them, because they're not learning the line items on a tax return, like what expenses go where, kind of thing. For meals and entertainment, 50% is deductible, 50% isn't. like what gets classified. So I still think there's a lot of more of an individual like knowledge. I guess maybe I don't know if that's the right word that goes behind it that AI is just not there yet.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised how many people just look at AI and say, okay, well, now I don't have to hire a lawyer. I don't have to hire an accountant. I don't have to hire this person just because I can just get someone who's half as cheap and just tell them to do it and just tell them to use AI.
Yeah, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the great things you mentioned was that the tax code is always changing. There's always something happening in Congress and with law that you have to keep up with. And sometimes the GPTs and this AI may not be updated on. And also when it comes to being creative with how to use it when it comes to your finances is also something someone who's experienced and seasonal in the field would know to do. Right. Yeah. So what's in the future for Prism?
Prism is just to keep scaling. We're working on building out the divisions right now. So instead of us kind of doing everything by ourselves, we're focusing on our insurance side, our business funding, our credit repair. But we're going to, once we get those other things dialed in and we build out a system for it that intertwines, now we're just going to be able to cross sell across the board. This way, we're not just going to be a bookkeeping firm or a tax firm. We don't want all our revenue to depend on, January to April. It's for focusing on the additional income streams that'll supplement throughout the year.
Yeah, and that is like the highs and lows, right? Because a lot of the times people, like a lot of firms just come in and they do everything for the, what do you call those, tax seasons, March, April, and then September, October. And then they're pretty dry for the rest of the year, especially the summers. And you really have to figure out what it takes to have that consistent MRR coming in. So what are some of the challenges like you're facing right now as you're building out some of these different divisions?
The first, as far as challenges, it's always going to be staffing. That's one. Now, as for insurance side of things, you don't really have to worry about staff as much because it's all contract and like commission based, and it's finding people who can do multiple, who has the knowledge to kind of bounce between things essentially. And it's actually a struggle we're having in the accounting side as well, because I could do all aspects of accounting because I've learned all aspects of it essentially, whether it's bookkeeping, payroll, tax, audit, everything. You can bring in someone who does accounting, but they might only know bookkeeping. So depending on the client, what the client needs are, and it's one of the issues we have with remote workers, as opposed to finding someone local who you can actually build up. If they have a question, you can walk them through each workflow, each process. This way you can essentially build your replacement and duplicate yourself. When it comes to remote work, you give someone a task, they do it. You can follow up and you can check in on it, but you're not there essentially holding their hand, walking through each step of what needs to get done. And that's where, systems come into play, but it's also, that's where issues come. So trying to just avoid build around the issues, that's some of the things that we've kind of noticed in us building out. But so right now it's for insurance is going to be next. We're finishing up our contracting for that. Then it's going to be credit repair. We already have everything set up for that. We already have the business funding. And then it's really just going to be about driving traffic to that.
Traffic? Like, are you
Leads.
talking about the marketing? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So once everything's built out, now the next thing is like actually generating the revenue and getting people across the door and then also figuring out, okay, the staffing. So who will be doing the fulfillment and everything. So yeah, it's the growing pains of growing a business, right?
That's really all it is. It's little hurdles.
Yeah. Well, James, thank you for jumping on. I know you shared quite a few things, and anyone who's watching this will learn quite like as on their journey as well of growing a firm or just in entrepreneurship and what comes with it. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at the James Svoboda, Facebook, and Twitter as well.
Okay, awesome. And Prism, this Prism.biz,
Yeah, so
right?
Prism.biz. That's our website. If you're interested, you could sign up for a consult. It's a free meeting essentially. We'll go through what you have, what your goals are, and see how we can come up with a solution to get you there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'll leave some of the links down below in the whatever it is, right? But yeah, thanks for coming on, James, and yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good.